Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is my review of the Antimatter Industries Scopeswitch. This video, like almost every video, was already previously viewed on the Sage Dynamics Patreon. I'm sure all of you that follow the channel and subscribe to the channel know that by now. Almost everything goes to Patreon first, and a lot of videos don't ever make it to YouTube. If you're interested in seeing videos that no one else gets to see, or seeing videos months sooner than you will on YouTube, you can check out patreon.com/Sage Dynamics and become a supporter. And thanks. And now let's get to the review of the Antimatter Industries Scopeswitch. One of the more controversial products to be released this year here in 2023. I like innovation, and sometimes innovation is disguised as what is that? And why is that? And what is that supposed to do that I already can't do? Which is like a normalcy or a frequency bias, or people's skill level is sometimes exaggerated in their own mind because everybody likes to have a high opinion of themselves. What we're kind of looking at is simplistic, at least an idea. What's a better way to change the magnification on a magnified optic mounted on a rifle? And Antimatter came up with a simple switching system that occupies rail space that often isn't occupied by anything else anyway, to where I can just do a simple slide activation with my thumb and change the magnification of the scope. For the review processes, and of course for full disclosure, Antimatter sent me the Scopeswitch. Didn't buy it. They also sent me an optic in it, which is the PLX Compact 1:8. First focal plane from Primary Arms. I reviewed Primary Arms optics in the past. I like them a lot, and I know them to be durable, so I wasn't really worried about the optic. If something came up optic related during the review process, of course we'd have to address that. So what we're talking about is the feasibility, the usability, and the durability of the Scopeswitch. This isn't something that's for every gun, and that's something that I think some people need to keep in mind, and also keep in mind that what may work for you may not be something, or may be something that somebody else doesn't even need. For my review, I mounted it on my Lantac 12.5, which has a just over 10-inch rail, and I found that I had enough space to mount the adjustment method and still have my light activation switch mounted at 12 o'clock. If I was running a PEC 15 or a Maul or something like that, I wouldn't have had enough room. But this doesn't mean this isn't something you can't put or configure on a rifle that runs a LAM. It just means that you're going to have to vote some things in different places on your island of room, or forego certain setups that you've become preferential to. It all depends on how much you want the usability or the increased usability of changing the magnification on your optic. Another thing that comes up is why bother? Well, the first thing I found going through this 2,000 round review process is, and I knew just looking at it from the premise that the why bother question wasn't being thought of critically when people brought that up. You have to significantly disturb your grip on a rifle to make an adjustment in a traditional way. So even if I'm able to keep it shouldered, upper body strength, dealing with suppressor weight and all the other weight of the rifle, and I'm not going to come off target at all, right? I still have to dismount my support side hand and bring it back and make that adjustment, and then reseat the support side hand. And not only can it take longer, it also significantly disturbs the sight picture that is becoming smaller in field of view as you make your adjustment, or in certain cases larger in field of view if I'm going from max magnification back to 1x or from 1x forward. On just the merits of the device, I could already see that I could easily drag my 1x sight picture over and then go to my full magnification, because I usually don't stop in the middle. Almost never do I stop in the middle. If something is 1 to 10, I'm using 1 or I'm using 10. There are a few exceptions to that, like if it's like a 3 to 25. If I'm only zeroing at 100 meters, I'm probably not dialing all the way out to 25. So the first thing I did to get this party started was mounting the Scopeswitch on my Lantac. It is an aggravating process, which kind of requires a third and a fourth hand. It's doable. I got it on there. But it was very trial and error, and also it's so dramatically different from mounting anything else, just based on the nature of getting the cables and its proper tension and everything double and triple checked before you start cutting things and securing things. Truing the optic wasn't a big deal. I mean, I've done that maybe not hundreds of times, but 100 or maybe a little bit less. But then putting the actual Scopeswitch in was a little aggravating. But once you kind of figure out how to do it, you'll be able to do it again if you have to. It's just a learning process. Once I got it installed, went ahead and zeroed the gun. Zeroed at 100 yards. 100 yards. I did Imperial for this, not metric. So I zeroed in 100 yards using the traditional ammo that I zero with. I usually use Black Hill 77 grain OTM, or I use AMU 77 grain TMK, their match ammo. Both of them are great rounds, and they're great for truing zero and for checking zero, going through a review process. And then I started using it. The first thing I noticed is exactly what I suspected. It makes a much faster adjustment for magnification, both going to max or coming from max, without disturbing the sight picture. This is more useful when I'm at 1 power and I change my point of aim to a much further away target and then want to go to max mag for positive identification, or just to shoot at a target that's further away and I want more magnification to be able to do that. I want to start using my reticle and whatnot, especially for those guys running second focal plane versus first focal plane. Sometimes you need to go to a higher magnification to start using your reticle. Manipulation took about 5 minutes worth of time getting used to. On this particular rifle, I do have a hand stop. I got a rail scales carve underneath there, and you do have to get around that. But if I ran this slick, obviously it wouldn't have been an issue. If I'm running a vertical grip, I just have to get around it. It's still going to be faster than completely dismounting that grip and coming back here and then going back up front. It's just a slide motion and a reseating of the hand. That's all it was. And I was able to run it on the timer and consistently change and hit faster than I would be able to with a traditional magnification. Before I even got into or got through the first 500 rounds, I put that on a shot timer. And I wanted to see if there was a significant savings in time during different tasks. So on the rifle, obviously I have an offset Holosun 509. So one of the things that people bring up is, why don't you just engage your close targets with your offset dot and then roll into your optic for your further away target? And that's a technique that I practice and do use. Of course, it would kind of depend on the situation allowing me to do that. So it just depends, but it was something I wanted to look at. So what I did is I took this rifle, obviously, to the range, and I checked that time against making the rapid adjustment. So I shot a close range target, had it set up at 5 yards, and I went out to steel at 80. And times are very similar between those two exercises, either 45 rolling back into my magnified optic, which is already set at 8 power, or starting on 1 power, coming up, and then making an adjustment out to 8 power and hitting that far steel back there at 80 yards. And the times are close, but assumptions have to be made based on what condition the rifle is in and what situation you need to do it in. And I'm just looking at not the intent of the technique, but which technique is viably faster and at least the same degree of accuracy. So I was seeing very close times, like I said, like I just showed you guys. Then I went ahead and just grabbed another rifle that had a magnified optic on it in a more traditional setup with just a rear rat tail, or whatever you want to call your scope adjustment lever slash bar slash knob slash nub slash thumb rest, whatever terminology you want to use or whatever terminology the manufacturer uses. I did not have another 1:8, so I used a Kales 1:6 mounted on an LMT. The guns are not identical, so it's not a comparison, but it is a comparison of technique. So I set up the same drill: close range target at 1 power and then steel at 80. Close range target at 1 power, steel at 80, comparing the scope switch versus a more traditional adjustment. The only deviation, of course, besides the fact that the rifles are completely different rifles, with completely different features as far as accessories go, is one of them has 8 magnification, which I think it's arguably harder because I have less field of view, and the other one only has a max of 6 magnification. Unfortunately, I don't own another 1:8. Everything I have is either 1:4, 1:6, or 1:10, or 3:25, 3:15, things like that. The scope switch is dramatically, noticeably faster with a good amount of practice than using a traditional adjustment method. And this is coming from someone who has spent their entire magnified optic life making their adjustments back here as quickly as possible while trying to keep my target in my field of vision so I don't have to go to max mag and then try to hunt it down. So even with the best possible runs between the two guns, and even though this whole review is in comparison, it is worth mentioning, the scope switch was adding value to the process. It was proving the concept of it works. Now you have to get into, is the durability there, is the reliability there, and is it worth it? Which may ultimately be a personal question. Anytime I shoot with a rifle with a magnified optic, I'm not just going to keep it on 1 power. I'm actually going to use it like a red dot. I'm going to run it on 1x, my reticle on, and then I'm going to, engage further targets away, work on shoot, don't shoot drills, positive identification of targets, which is where the big value with 1:6s, 1:8s is for just intermediate distance or self-defense rifles. Not so much in sniper mode or whatever. And I really started to like it almost too much because it became, I don't want to say like cheating, but it felt like I was cheating. It felt like it shouldn't be this easy. It shouldn't be this fast. And the only hang up that I ever really had was in those first, I'd say 100 rounds of getting used to getting away from that hand stop when I made the adjustment and then remembering to reseat. And even in like an emergency situation or whatever, I could go to max magnification and just go to an old school magwell grip and still be able to have the stability to get a good hit. Even though that's not functionally true or correct for a rifle like this, I'd want to come back out here. I can do it if I had to. So it can be even faster if you sacrifice a little bit of your support hand placement based on where you normally keep your support hand anyway. And you may be different from me. You may not run a default out front arm extended type of grip. You may use a traditional military palm support grip, which means you wouldn't have this hand stop on there most likely, or you wouldn't be using it like I am, so it wouldn't be an issue anyway. After that first 500 rounds, we got to the burn down, which is 500 rounds as quickly as possible to see if that increased rate of fire identifies any issue that I wouldn't otherwise notice with the same round count over a much longer period of time. So 5 to 6 minutes versus 5 to 6 hours, days, weeks. You've heard it before. Here's your burn down. All the burn down gave me was 500 rounds shot really quickly in a very hot gun. I didn't have any issues with the Scopeswitch. Everything was torqued good. I used thread locker where it needed to be used. And I mean, it's just a higher volume of fire, even though a lot of heat is being generated underneath that mount right there in the chamber, bolt carrier group, all that. Didn't observe any issues. So that was the first 1,000 rounds done, and then just with the next 1,000 rounds, I just used it for just general shooting. Like it's kind of like what I did with the first 500 rounds after I got used to it. I wanted to get more acclimated to it and use it for, like I said, what I'm going to use my rifles for. One thing that I did find, another significant advantage I found with this is using the gun in awkward positions. From a prone position, some people don't like the higher mounts. They don't like the 193s or the 203s. I personally don't have an issue with it. Running it off a mag pod, running it off a bag support, also shooting in more complicated physical positions, more unorthodox positions, such as like urban prone, as it's called, which is basically just fetal. Or running like a VTAC or a wall barricaded, mouse hole drill. Muzzle out of the hole, muzzle into the hole. The adjustments they're just fast. I couldn't find a situation with using the Scopeswitch where it actually complicated what I was trying to do. If anything, it made things slightly easier to significantly easier. One issue that could potentially arise, and this is all based on what school of thought you have trained in, is transferring the rifle over to your support side. You're still going to be able to manipulate the gun, and you're still going to have the same kind of problems you would have normally. So on this rifle, I have my Surefire mounted on the right side of the gun, which is outboard for me because I'm shooting the rifle right-handed, and I want the light on the outside of my exposure when using cover and things like that. If I switch over to my left shoulder, well, that light is going to be in the way, not the Scopeswitch. The manipulation is center line and it's ambi, so that's not going to be an issue. Obviously, my 45 degree would no longer be as usable. It's still usable though. But again, that's not the Scopeswitch. So configuration of just talking about this device, no issue. And I'm sure they're going to give you guys, if they haven't already, I haven't checked since release, they're going to give you guys your 12 o'clock mounts, I'm sure. Another thing, just even though this isn't a review of the PLX 1-8, the PLX 1-8 is fantastic. It is a great optic. The only thing that I was able to break, and we'll get to the drop testing here soon, is I did dent up one of my turret caps pretty good, and I wasn't able to put it back on in fact, that happened on the very first drop. But everything was just rock solid. Now, drop testing is something you guys want to hear about, so we'll go ahead and get right to that. If you're not familiar, it's a drop shoulder height every 500 rounds to see if that increased velocity and gravity in the laws of physics can cause issues with the firearm. And it's not necessarily simulating, just like, hey, people are going to drop their rifles, so let me drop it in the testing, even though people do drop their rifles. I don't know how many times I've seen somebody get a false connection on a QD and start to move down range, and it was just like, and the rifle just kind of clattered onto the ground, and it was all very embarrassing, and people just kind of froze. People do drop gear. They set rifles up and they fall over. It's a thing. It's always been a thing. It shouldn't happen, but it does because we're human. We're not machines. We make mistakes. Competence leads to complacency, that kind of thing. So the drop testing is to simulate just a lot of hard contact with the optic. Not saying that people are going to drop their guns. I don't know how many times I've said that, and people still fixate on, well, I don't drop my rifle. You don't, you will. There's nobody long enough term that's not going to do that. But it's not designed to just simulate that. It's designed to deliver that shock force to the object, in this case, my optic mount, to see if that causes any issues. So before we get to that, here's a 5-round group fired with 77 grain Black Hills OTM that I shot at 100 yards, bag supported, for my 0 confirmation. Good thing the Lantac is a good, nice, accurate gun. We're not going to have any questions about that, well, provided everything goes well. And here is 4 drop tests, 1 drop test every 500 rounds during the 2,000 round 4 video review process. And of course, moment of truth, did it maintain its 0? So here's another 5-round group, again, 100 yards, 77 grain OTM Black Hills, bag supported after the final drop. Well, that's a zeroed gun. Getting to the durability, it's there. Now, you can still knock this thing at a 0. And another concern you have with mounts is, if it loses its 0, was it the mount or was it the optic? That's always a question that you have to take into consideration. And that was something, like I said at the beginning of the video, that I was worried about if it was going to come up. The PLX was fantastically durable, as I've come to expect from the higher end optic offerings from Primary Arms. And the Scopeswitch performed fantastically. There are some things that I just kind of forego. It does come with some cover plates that you can put in there to cover these exposed adjustment wires. I didn't bother because I wanted to see if it would snag on stuff. And it didn't. It doesn't mean it can't. If I went running through the woods here in Tennessee and ran into some what-a-minute vines and some, I don't know all the plants here yet because I came from Georgia. Not all the stuff's the same. It's all green, but it's different. I might be able to snag that up on something, but this is steel, and the plant is a plant, so I think in tug-of-war, the steel would win. They've already made some subtle design changes based on user feedback, which actually aggravated me a little bit because the screws they use and the mounting interface and stuff like that, those are already different, so I'm not really reviewing what people are buying. The overall product is exactly the same, but those small changes did affect my ability to talk about some of the complaints that people had. My bottom line on this is, if you think it's slower than a traditional adjustment on your magnified optic, your 1:4, your 1:6, whatever you use, then you're not using it right. It's dramatically faster. I took this rifle to a class with me, handed it to a student, said, hey, check it out. And their first comment was, that's faster. Another student, that's faster. Another student, that's faster. And these are guys that have varied skill levels on magnified optics. It makes adjustments more intuitive, and it allows me to focus on my desired point of impact at 1x and keep it in my field of view as my field of view reduces. Working it around cover, somebody said that somebody had a problem with that. I still can't visualize. I didn't watch the video, but because I try not to watch any videos on products, or I don't watch any videos on products prior to reviewing them because I don't want any kind of implicit bias to be put into place. Unless it's something unavoidable, which doesn't happen very often. But some people said that there was an issue, somebody had issues working this thing around cover, and I can't visualize that because there's not a dramatic, in fact, if anything, you move less when using this than you do when you're using a traditional adjustment with it. So I'm still trying to picture that. Maybe I'll check the video out after this, but it sounds more of like a technique issue and not a gear issue. But I can't speak on that. Some of the other issues that people brought up is like, well, it doesn't do anything better. It does. It's faster. It all depends on if you're willing to make small changes to gain an advantage of time. And really, that's what it boils down to, is it allows for faster adjustments. That's it. That's all it's trying to do. you disturb the sight picture less, you keep the field of view around what you're trying to shoot at, either coming from magnification or going back to it. And that's just speed. So if you can always have half a second or a second worth of speed faster, if you can always perform your desired task half a second to a second faster, all you have to do is use a different piece of equipment. That's why a lot of different pieces of equipment exist, because they provided just enough increase in usability and speed savings, or time savings, I should say, that people felt it was worth it. I think these things are going to be fantastically popular in competition type shooting, depending on how that affects rules. I'm not really sure how that's going to work. But the one significant drawback is it does take up a lot of usable rail space here at the end. So if you have a shorter gun, say a 12.5 or a 10.5, you may not be able to put, if you run a laser, you may not be able to put your accessories where you want them. You can still run them. Because I'm just running a hot button up here to run my weapon light, it wasn't an issue. But I can see if I had to use it, like on a 7-inch rail, this would be super complicated. Doable though. On an 8-inch rail, same thing. 10-inch rail, same thing. And I'm just over 10 inches on this Lantac rail. And it just works. Now, am I going to run out and buy these for all my guns? No. Not because I don't see the value in them, but because some of my rifles have different purposes, different priorities. My night vision guns have to stay night vision guns, and I like the maul. And the maul takes up a pretty good amount of rail space, and I don't want to sacrifice that rail space for this accessory, even though most of my night vision guns don't have magnified optics on them anyway, because you can't really use 8-power passive aiming through a set of PVS 15s. And I don't like clip-ons for general intermediate distance purposes, but that's a separate topic. So Scopeswitch, I think it's awesome. And I think if you have a rifle that's literally going to be set up with the basics, which is an optic, a sling, and a light, this might be another option you can throw on there to, one, shorten the learning curve if you're new to magnified optics for close distance purposes. And two, just make adjustments faster and more stable and more reliable, regardless of what shooting position you happen to find yourself in. Till next time, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.